Welcome to the Quantum City Initiative, a show about the most important stories, ideas at the intersection of AI, cities, real estate, and the leaders shaping the future of how and where we live and work. Do you save and reinvigorate cities, or are you building new ones?
What is most critical for cities in the future with this sort of AI factory race to work? All right, EP 36, the QCI show, last day of July. Coffee is strong. You got your lid on today. How you doing, man?
It's a lid it's the depths of summer, so I'm going t-shirt and lid. We got one more month left, so I'm living it up. How are you?
I thought that, but I did my hair today, so is what it is.
Nice. It's looking good, looking fresh.
A lot to talk about today. A lot of action, insane amount of news this week. Really good anchor story. We talk power. We talk some capital raise. We talk an absolutely wild story in the public markets. And then one more bit of news is probably the craziest thing I've ever read in a long time. Could be the best show yet. 36 steps in. Could be the best show. Could be the worst show. I don't know. Well, let's find out. The anchor story this week. We've talked about power. The importance of power. Keeps my computer on right now. The way the world used to work was when you put a building up, you build a building, you just kind of always had some water and you kind of always had some power. PJM, okay, is the company that runs the electric grid for 67 million people across 13 states. The biggest grid in America, including Northern Virginia. What's important about Northern Virginia? Data center capital of the world right now, okay? So they're getting strained. PJM went out to the market to purchase electricity for 2028. They couldn't purchase enough power. So that spooked them a little bit, right? Nobody wants to be on the dark. Okay. Earlier this week, because there's not enough power, PJM did something a grid operator has never done before. It told the data centers that are using their power in writing, if you don't bring your own power supply, we reserve the right to unplug you. Hasn't happened. This is an interesting story. What's your take? Power companies fighting back. Power companies don't want to strain. Is this a natural evolution to where we should be moving anyways? These massively power hungry data centers should have their own generators. They should be purchasing their own power on their own. This is the first time I'm seeing a utility company, PJM, just say no.
I think what we're seeing is the infrastructure argument has been percolating for a while, right? I think the battle heading into midterms and into 2027, we're going to continue to see kind of this narrative around obviously all things AI, but infrastructure has been one of the top issues predating all this AI madness. So that's not necessarily new. And the frustrating piece of it is that when you think about the big tech companies and the hyperscalers, a lot of them, first off, they have the cash flow, they have the competency, and they have seemingly the desire to do things, quote unquote, behind the meter, right? Do their own power, do their own water. Like for them, it's probably easier, right? Like closed loop system, everybody stay out of our way, we can do it, which kind of solves all the issues both for regular citizens and consumers. And they're being blocked on that. I think there's a little bit of a arm wrestling match in terms of who wants to grab the credit for what is something that I think most people agree will be a pretty good driver of economic growth and GDP when it comes to AI. Obviously, how that gets distributed and who sees the economic gains is a worthy debate in terms of the construct of where the gains accrue to. But there's a lot of issues that come down to political gridlock, which is like the least interesting kind of type of problem to be solving. It's frustrating. The silver lining of all this is when there are constraints, and particularly for people who don't necessarily work in technology and these things, they tend to view certain constraints as, hey, we're holding things back and all of this. One thing I'll point out is that oftentimes and I'm not advocating for constraining this, but what I will say is like oftentimes innovative companies, people, entrepreneurs tend to find ways, those constraints force them to find ways
Yeah,
to
they
be
want to.
efficient, right? We're saying, hey, we need all this compute, which I'm sure we're going to need more compute, and that requires power and things like that. But when you think about kind of the concept of Moore's law and costs of tokens and all of these things, like you're seeing the battle for how do you make these things more cost efficient? Ultimately, so long as there is competition, which there's statewide competition with regards to business policy to attract the companies that are looking to make these investments. There's private market competition between all the big companies. I think we have healthy competition right now. I'd like to make sure that stays open. You don't want just the big companies competing. You want space for, the startups and folks like that to continue to challenge them. More competition, the better. But this is something we're probably going to be talking about every week for a year at least, probably years.
I get the innovation angle. Love to see more of that with regard to the power generation. Where my mind went on all this is if you are purchasing, if you're a developer and you're purchasing land, if you're Blackstone, and we'll get to some of that in a little bit, who wants to underwrite and invest in these data centers, buy Meta, whatever, name big tech company, the returns and cap rates are going to be drastically different depending on who your utility provider are now. Because
Yeah.
if PJM says, oh, well, you got to bring your own power, I guess there's the opportunity to bring it cheaper, but there's also the opportunity that it drastically impacts the return on investment. So is this going to shift where folks look to develop, and then the power friendly utility companies? Does this PJM's already powering an insane amount of data centers, and some of
Yeah,
the
that 66
grandfather.
million number you just talked about is, and the interruption, just so people know, there wasn't a blackout, but there
Right.
was essentially, let's just call it a service interruption. And the scale was from Virginia to all the way up to Chicago and Illinois. I think, again, some of the possible ancillary benefits is that when we think about utilities, um, some of these things have become so entrenched from a market perspective. Like at my home, I don't have optionality on ultimately where I get my electric from. And it will take a long time, but some free market capitalism in kind of the utility space, if we can find a path to that in some form or factor, that would be a good thing. They now have FiOS that can connect to my home. It's pushing price down. That's a good thing for me as a consumer. If we can bring a little free market competition, that'd be a good thing. But I think in terms of like when you look at this, essentially what's happening is powered land is splitting in half, right? Firm land and then interruptible, let's call it, and it's same substation, if you will, same fiber, but one has contracted generation source, the other doesn't. And that's just not going to be the same asset anymore. And to some degree, to take the side of PJM, in certain ways, this is the market working, because what they're saying is they're pricing a scarce resource that's making the marginal user pay for the supply that ultimately they're inducing. That's market economics 101.
What is super interesting before we move on, you were bringing it back home. So we lost our power. What was that crazy storm in February or something like that, where kids were out of school for 2 weeks? We had 6 feet of snowfall. That was absolutely bananas. I think we lost power for over a week. Now, just for fun, I did the math, and luckily, we put a whole house generator in because in Duxbury, you got crazy wind and power's always out. At that time, and I don't know where it is recently, it was cheaper to power my home via the whole house generator via nat gas than it was for me to be hooked up to the electric grid. And so I got my electric bill and I was like, well, that is shockingly low for what it would have been in the winter. Now, the house generator doesn't skimp. It does all the same thing that the electric grid would. And so that got me thinking, now I'm bringing my own power. Now, the generator is not, it's
Wow.
equally as efficient. It's louder.
It's loud. I can deal with that though if I'm paying less. My
but
wife, but
yeah, so I don't know.
look, it's when we think about the quantum city in the framework that we talk about, there's two key concepts, which is system efficiency and city compute, and they're in direct tension with and conflict with one another, right? So a city can host enormous amounts of compute and still fail on efficiency. Like the compute doesn't stand alone. It's a connected ecosystem, right? So it needs the grid cannot absorb the load, and you cannot expect residents, let's say, to subsidize the hyperscalers. So I do believe it is the right move to say that the hyperscalers need to subsidize themselves. The question is going to be timeline. We create the right construct in a way that can keep up with their needs. Probably some benefits in a little bit of this design. Now, you look at, and when you look at like Microsoft, I think just announced big investments, a lot of very smart money is still investing substantially more in data centers. So I don't think we're at a place, but some challenges to say overbuilding like we saw with fiber around the .com, those might be features, not bugs. I think it's probably too early to tell. And when you listen to, let's call it the players in the game, it's just very hard to parse the strategic angles of when the big folks are talking their book and trying to, if they feel they're behind and then they take the side of burden and capture, and then when they think they're ahead and they're saying, let's free the whole thing, or they think they're ahead and they want regulatory capture, right? So a lot of people kind of switch positions, right? Anthropic is very openly, when you go up the stack into the models, Anthropic is very openly trying to kill open source because it's a competitive threat and they need to sell tokens at a 90% gross margin. Open source could hurt that business model. OpenAI recently has felt like it's behind, and Jensen from NVIDIA just wrote a big letter about supporting open source, and Sam Altman came out in support of open source, probably because they think they're in second place. So it's like, give it 6 months. If they think they're in first, are they going to lean into regulatory capture? And particularly if they think, Congress flips and some of this stuff, like it's a very multivariate game from power and land up into data center construction, up into the technology layers. So
yeah, and listen, it all goes away. All the problems go away if they just start giving some power for free. You get some power, you get some power, you get some power. Come on, Meta comes in, Meta and BlackRock come in. They want a data center in Virginia. Just subsidize all of the individuals and people in Virginia, and then boom, you got all the power you want. Now you got to bring it, but
yeah.
All right, let's talk about El Paso, Texas. El Paso, everything's bigger in Texas. You ever been to El Paso?
I've never been to El Paso, so this is gonna be very much backseat driver assessment. I don't love assessing cities I haven't been to. I don't think that's necessarily giving them a fair shot, but we'll have to take the internet's word for some of these in terms of the research.
Everything you do read on the internet is true.
Totally true.
That we know.
Yep.
Let's talk about El Paso, Texas for a bit. Okay. It's becoming, well, we know Texas is becoming somewhat of a data center hub. We were just talking about Northern Virginia, DC and whatnot. 3 campuses are under development regionally, totaling almost 6.5 gigawatts of projected demand. Okay, that's huge. Meta is in Northeast El Paso, Project Jupiter, Santa Teresa, New Mexico, and larger campuses planned for 4+. Meta broke ground. Folks are up in arms. Blackstone just came in and purchased it. We'll talk about that deal in a little bit. Everybody's talking about, is it going to create jobs? Is it not going to create jobs? Is it going to be a major demand suck on the power? Is it going to pollute our water? The civic fight is real. Council voted in May 26th to stop actively recruiting and incentivizing these projects. However, it feels like we're there. What's honest and where I think things are going, and again, this is the discussion we continue to have, is does this power the rise of the rest. I'll let you talk about some of the QCI scorecard and on the individual liberty and dynamism. I hadn't heard of El Paso as a data center hotspot. I still fundamentally believe, and we said it earlier on the previous show, is that I do believe that all asset classes in real estate, commercial, retail, resi will follow these data centers because everything will follow the money and these massive demands. Will this put El Paso really on the map as one of the power players in the States?
This is like this one's nuanced. I think Meta broke ground October of 25. And so when people look at 1 gigawatt, right? Just so people can kind of understand
Wait,
scale.
what was the Back to the Future 1.8 gig? What was the? I'm gonna Google that before you. So now I interrupted you, but what was that? Keep going.
I don't remember the reference to Back to the Future, but it's probably going to look small in comparison to what we're seeing for space data centers and everything today. But apparently 4,000 peak construction worker jobs. And then it settles in, I think, at about 300 permanent jobs. So the permanent job, once let's call it a 1 gigawatt data center comes online, if you want to peg 1 gigawatt at 300 full-time jobs, it's a $10 billion investment. So I think the return on the direct permanent jobs is less than probably what people would like to see. But those 4,000 construction, when people say, oh, it's not permanent jobs, nothing in construction is permanent. You go project to project. 4,000 is pretty good. So to your point, the question will be, do these regions, say within states, develop kind of the appetite to build continually? Because if you do, then you're going to have those 4,000 workers staying local and moving from project to project. But 1 gigawatt powers essentially 750,000 homes. That's the equivalent. Meta is apparently given $500,000, like a workforce grant with the El Paso Public Schools. You mentioned BlackRock taking 80%. It's a 1,000-acre campus. I would love to know. I didn't get this in the research, but of the 1,000 acres, how much of that is the actual physical infrastructure of the data center? I'd be interested to understand the scale of these developments in terms of the physical infrastructure. What of that 1,000 acres is used for, say, something else? BlackRock is putting in $4.9 billion of cash, and Meta is pocketing $1 billion distribution from it. So they'll be happy about that, even though $1 billion for Meta is like chump change. And they seem to have a model around this because they did a very similar deal where Blue Owl took 80% of $27 billion Hyperion campus in Louisiana. So off balance sheet AI infrastructure is now a playbook, right? Hey, we develop these things, we make it an asset. It's core to our business. We control how it gets developed. We like that. And then we bring in people that are in that business of probably getting yield and figuring out liquidity and all that stuff, which is not necessarily going to move the needle for a company like Meta and the hyperscalers. So for El Paso, they voted to stop recruiting hyperscale data centers. So there was a bunch of speakers, even in Texas, and the council voted 5-3 against terminating the Meta incentive agreement. They had a bunch of incentives. And apparently the crowd started chanting, vote them out. So regardless of blue, red, what have you, there's still the populist pushback. And then they seemingly adopted a data center policy framework. So it ends tax breaks, which I'm fine with. And it replaces the by right permitting with special use permits, and it requires public disclosure and council oversight. So even in some of the, let's call it, more free market business policy states, there's going to be, I think, region by region competition. So we're seeing some pushback there. And what it means for El Paso is, I don't know, the people of El Paso ultimately should have a say in this, but it feels like a little bit of a middle ground, right? I'm not sure you want to be home to one data center. You probably want to be home to none or some, because it feels like getting stuck in the middle a little bit. I can understand wanting to do them the right way, but it just shows how hard it is to do these things in a predictable manner where you're going to see the big guys zigging and zagging and finding local councils that they can probably sneak these into. We saw this with the Oracle OpenAI Michigan data center, right? Like they seemingly have snuck one through, and now everybody's locking down and all right, we're gonna jet somewhere else. Even Blackstone, who had done that deal in Virginia, we're starting to see Virginia get clamped down, right? So there seems to be these windows where we talked about Mr. Wonderful. He's got his project in, what is it, Nevada or New Mexico?
Yeah, Utah, right?
Utah. You're right.
Yeah.
That's getting a bunch of pushback. When we bring it back to El Paso, and I was looking into El Paso, they do still have the Texas kind of regulatory environment, which is strong, and it's a low cost of entry. There is this new special use permit regime, which is trading development speed for public oversight. And I'd give it a B minus, which might be a little generous because, again, I think it's a middle way, which I don't love. I kind of like picking one side of the trade. From an economic dynamism perspective, there's enormous capital inflow with that. And the I've never heard this term, but people on the internet call it the borderplex, which is like the border complex. They've got economic activity because of everything that happens because of the borderplex, but growth is single sector, and permanent job creation, I think, is thin relative to the capital being deployed. So I'll give it a C plus. And then system efficiency, they're not strong, right? So power and water are like very obvious constraints. There's no integrated framework until July 20th. And that comes after the deal is done. So that seems to be like the weakest pillar by a wide margin. Citizen-centric design, I might not necessarily agree with the citizens, but if we're gonna take what happened with the council, there's 7-8 is pretty long deliberation where the citizens voiced their concerns, and they were overridden by the council 5-3. So look, you tend to get the largest. I don't know if 200 people is necessarily indicative of how the general population feels, but there's long-standing underinvestment in apparently neighborhoods south of the main highway in El Paso. And so there's apparently also school closures happening that are concurrent with the big build out. So I guess you'd give that a C. And then with regards to the compute, it's about to host 6.5 gigawatts of compute and capture basically none of it is a civic capability. And so when you think about all these upstream problems with citizen-centric design, and the 500K to the El Paso school feels just like a
light
couple of guys sitting in a saloon, whatever, in El Paso. It's like, you'll get some credit for that. I'd rather see much better structural alignment, because what are you going to do with a one-time payment of 500K? Look, I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that, like whatever. That's a throwaway marketing cost for Meta. But I think the bigger issue that we don't seem to be solving, and there has to be some sort of rationale with these hyperscalers that I'm sure they've thought this all through, but how do you bring along the benefits and get better local alignment? And maybe they've just got their pipeline really nailed, and they're like, look, you sneak one into Michigan in Dearborn, you sneak one into El Paso, you sneak one into wherever. And frankly, we don't need local alignment. I think that's short-sighted, because it's now just becoming such a bigger national issue. The compute will be fine, but I don't think you can say they have. When you go look at Dubai, the compute is directly impacting the benefits of the citizenry. So overall, it's still a C grade, right?
I just can't. That's the reality. I like your sneaking analogy. It does feel like, which is not super surprising at all. These massive companies with sort of massive legal reach can find ways, backdoors into specific communities and get around whatever it may be. I just can't stop thinking about, listen, if Meta really wanted to develop El Paso and name any specific city, you can subsidize power, you can help subsidize and build the school systems, and you could do a lot for the community that can really win them over. Listen, at the end of the day, everybody's for sale. Okay. And I hate to say that, but it is true. So if you really wanted to get school boards, the city council, whoever it may be, in any specific city, state, doesn't matter what it is, community, there's a lot you can do to really impact the community if you wanted to come in and build these massive data centers. The other thing, again, with all of this is, I know we're building on land here. I feel like we really need to get, SpaceX has been taking it on the chin in the public markets, which we kind of knew was going to happen. Lockup period hasn't even hit yet, but I feel like we need to innovate on data centers a bit here. I feel like we're building in the wrong spot. Building horizontal just doesn't feel like the right play. I feel like you got to go vertical or you got to go to space. I don't want you in the ocean, but I don't know.
Yeah, we know you don't want them in the oceans, which I'm fine with. What I think is going to be interesting to this, because we're going to put a pin in El Paso and come back to it, is the council, they wrote real rules for how they want to handle data center on July 20th, which was 8 days after BlackRock came in and did their deal. And when you look at the lease, right, Meta is going to be using this compute. And so I think there's a framework here where when you're coming in and doing these things, if you want to show real commitment to a local community, there's going to be some form of compute or data access where you're going to see if they cut a good deal, city planning and emergency systems are running on, say, like Meta's infrastructure. And I think that would be a community benefit agreement with teeth, not 500K throw away to the school. But the flip side is El Paso is not New York. It's not one of the major tier ones. So is this a bad deal, or is this the type of deal a mid-sized border city was going to get? I don't know. It's still a little too early to do comps. And we're going to come back to it because for El Paso, the city council elections are on November 3rd. The filing deadline to run is August 17th. That's right around the corner. And districts 1, 5, 6, and 8. So you think of that 5-3 vote are up for election. So we'll come back and see. I think the true reflection of how the El Paso community feels about this we'll know by November 3rd.
Yeah, we should go on the road. I'd love some good El Paso. All I can think about it is there's like
the Borderplex.
Isn't there a salsa called El Paso or something like that? I think that it's in grocery stores. This is all I kept thinking about. I'm just kind of hungry. Quick hits, an insane amount of quick hits this week. None of them will be quick. I promise you that. Oh, but Doc Brown, back to that. It was 1.21 gigawatts of electricity to power the flux capacitor. Okay. Which I do believe he pronounced gigawatts. Yeah. So
you called them gigawatts?
I think you called them gigawatts.
Right, the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity. 1.21 gigawatts! 1.21 gigawatts!
Okay. Quick hits. This story is wild. It's just fantastic. Listen, if you mess with the bull, you're going to get the horns. Okay. Leopold Aschenbrenner. Okay. So he had a hedge fund, Situational Awareness, which is just a funny name. But so who is Leopold? He is a 25-year-old genius, I believe. He was at OpenAI. He wrote this white paper. He was on the OpenAI sort of artificial general intelligence research side of the house. He wrote this white paper or blog post or whatever it may be, which he then turned into raising, I believe it was $1.5 billion to start. The fund then went on to raise about $45 billion in capital. So he's 25 years old, super smart, genius. He was all over the news just a couple of weeks ago because his fund had reported 439% gains through June. Okay.
And
Wow, man, you should have sold it all at the top.
running 4x leverage.
Running 4x leverage, I think. Okay, so here's what happened this past week. Okay. With the Fed held rates steady. We're not necessarily going to talk about that. We talk about the Fed. There wasn't a huge surprise there. But on July 27th, Citadel Securities, and there's two different Citadels here. They're both owned by Papa Griffin, who's the bull here. And one of their strategists published a note calling for a surprise Fed rate hike, okay, at the meeting.
Yeah.
Citadel, listen, generally when they publish...
Sure they knew who they were squeezing with that.
People listen, right? People listen. That's all I'm going to say. I don't know what that means. The market, which was jittery coming into the Fed meeting as a whole, and it has been all over the place the past couple of weeks anyways, had a massive sell-off, specifically in the chips, specifically in the AI trade, and specifically in tech, right? Which is where 25-year-old Leopold had a massive amount of exposure. Okay, so what happened? He called, or the news was a surprise Fed rate hike. That caused a massive drop. When you're leveraged and you trigger certain events, you get margin called, which is exactly what happened to this poor kid's. He is a kid, a hedge fund. His $45 billion hedge fund was margin called by Goldman, JP Morgan, Bank of America. Situational Awareness was forced to dump almost absolutely everything for pennies on the dollar within 24 hours. Guess who was sitting there to buy up for pennies on the dollar every single one of his positions?
Papa Griff.
Ken Griffith, Citadel Hedge Fund, which is a different entity.
Yeah. First off, I'll start with the area that I disagree with you on. He's not a kid. He's a legal adult. And even though you said 25, I think he's 24. But you lose the moniker of kid when you are, first off, over 18. But even if you want to consider I'm still kids.
And you raise $45 billion in assets for a hedge fund.
You're not a kid anymore. But I think outside of named Leopold, I will withhold bagging on this guy. Because first and foremost, he's clearly a very sharp dude, right?
No doubt about it.
Anybody who is going to argue otherwise hasn't studied, number one, like you go try to raise that quantum of capital.
Well, he was also at OpenAI's super intelligence team. Like, brilliant.
And the other thing you have to remember is when you look at whether it's Bill Ackman, who has been super successful, or if you look at our boy Ray Dalio, who built the biggest hedge fund in the world. I don't know if it's still true today or not. I haven't kept up with that. But like James Street, the names that we have in here, just like it's a super competitive space. This guy clearly got squeezed. He fell on his face. But Ackman and Dalio did the exact same thing, right? So Dalio had famously kind of during the economic run during the Reagan era and what was tremendous economic growth had kind of gone to the mat, and he was in his 30s, right? This guy's 24, but Dalio was in his 30s. And he predicted ultimately that the market was going to come down, the economy was going to come down, and Reagan and Volcker kind of stuck the landing on inflation, ripped GDP growth. A lot of it came from globalization and all of that. But Dalio lost. He had to let everybody go from Bridgewater. I believe he moved back in with his parents. He was the last person working at Bridgewater, and just brick by brick, obviously built it back up. He's written a lot of good material on what he learned through that experience. And Ackman didn't get that far down, but he got hit real bad as recently as 2015-16. And he has talked a lot about how, not brick by brick, he talked about it like you got to climb a mountain. You do it one step at a time and you don't look at the top of the mountain. So I think a lot of people want to bag on this guy, but I actually think the fund was right about the thesis. AI infrastructure, how often do we talk about this, right? It's real. But when you're that concentrated from a thesis perspective
and levered,
the combination with the 4x levered, that's a crowded trade, and it's not a conviction position, if you will. It's a margin call waiting for said catalyst. And the macro letter, whether what, to your point, whether it was a catalyst or not, these guys that play in this game, that there's a winner and a loser in trades, right? He came out on the losing end on this one, but he kept the Anthropic stake.
Yep.
Which I think is $5 billion. Did I see that? So he
Yep.
kept the Anthropic stake. And after everything, the margin calls, forced sale, block trade, like his best asset is still owned.
No, he's still doing fine.
Shouldn't survive. So
Sure.
he
Public
didn't-
games, different.
Now, I bet you this guy's a stud in his 30s.
Yeah, listen,
We'll see. It comes down to resilience.
to survive this, maintain that stake. Listen, just wild. And to your point, of course, it was of course, there were valuable assets there. Ken Griffin doesn't come in and just generally buy garbage, right? I'm sure he's made mistakes in his career, but he doesn't generally buy garbage. What Ken Griffin does do is he buys it at the right price. Looks like he got it at the right price here.
Right.
Quick hit number 2. Your friend of the pod, TK, Travis Kalanick, his Adams. You love saying bits and atoms all the time. You love saying that stuff. Adams closed a $1.7 billion equity round led by Andreessen, Fifth Wall, Bain, any number of different people. You know more about TK and Adams and cloud kitchens and the web he's weaving. Tell me a little bit about this deal and why it's important or what's happening.
I think it's just indicative of where, when you think about proptech and the problem with proptech, it's been, you look at the scale of, let's call it AUM, and all of people like ourselves who are in quote unquote proptech, which is just technology for the built environment property, right? When you look at the AUM and you look at your typical kind of investor pitch deck for somebody doing something in proptech, they tend to look at the overall TAM based off of the AUM, and you see it as ultimately anything, let's just call it real estate, real assets, is upwards in the trillions. So it seems huge. Even if you draw that down to commercial real estate, it's like somewhere between 16 to billion, just commercial, right? Obviously, single family home and these things are huge, but commercial in the US is quantums of many billions. And then, or excuse me, higher than that, hundreds of billions. And then when you look at the total global IT spend, just let's say software, cloud services, things like that, it's 10 billion for an asset class that's trillions of dollars. And so the TAM is much smaller than the AUM. Your addressable market is not the TAM of the hard asset, unless you're getting into the hard asset. And you know what Kalanick and Adams are doing is just that, is essentially a new asset class. And it's no longer even called cloud kitchens. It's just a product line within Adams. So that kind of moniker has been retired, but their food, I think it's called Adams Food product, is the way they would describe it is like, it's a food computer. So when you think about a computer outputs information, what would a computer output for something other than information that's a physical good? Well, you can think of it as a food factory or assembly line, which a lot of people are not going to want to think of it that way because it cheapens the concept of food, which is very personal and emotional. But so they call it a computer, but it's got software, it's got hardware, particularly the hardware that are robots that make food, package food. And then you need the logistics component. Obviously, he comes from Uber, and moving things is something that he's proven he's very good at. And so food was just the first vertical segment within Adams where they're really trying to develop this kind of like hard infrastructure of like, what's a really hard thing to produce? Can it be more computed than produced by humans? And almost all of the verticals, because they're doing something in mining, physical things need to get places. So transportation and logistics is a big component of one of the core competencies that he's already proved. I think this is going to be, you're going to start to see this world of what people think is like AI robotics and prop tech being separate things really starting to come together and look as one. Brendan Wallace, the guy who runs Fifth Wall, who produces a lot of LinkedIn videos, talked about.
I hope that's what people say about me someday. Greg Gomer, guy who produces a lot of LinkedIn
videos. But he produces a lot of videos. I think it was Lime. Is Lime the scooter company they did? There's another Bird. I think they did Lime, right? But he talked about how at first people, and look, it takes somebody with conviction like Kalanick. There's a ton of pushback on anything capital intensive. But I think when people push back on capital intensity, they also start to miss the whole point of venture capital, right? Which is you're playing for outsized outcome. Yes, you want capital efficiency for sure. But at the end of the day, one deal tends to carry the fund. And when you think about proptech and you want to make that total AUM number the true TAM, you got to do hard things in the physical world. Nobody better to do it than Kalanick for sure.
I feel like there's a master class in corporate structure here somewhere and his capital raise and what's going on. Speculate on what's going on, but he had the Cloud Kitchens IPO that was going to go, that didn't go, and then that's folded into what is Adams and all that sort of stuff. I feel, listen, this guy's, there's no doubt he's a rock star in the space. I feel like there's much more to pull on. I'm just uneducated about what he's cooking, but good for him.
He has talked a little bit about, and it's interesting to see him come back to the venture world, right? In his opinion, his mind, different people have different interpretations of how he was treated by the board at Uber, particularly Benchmark. And it's funny that Benchmark was associated both with Uber and with WeWork, right? These very, let's say, infamous to some people, famous to others, founders that kind of willed these really hard physical world businesses into existence. And Benchmark, one's a coincidence, two's a fluke, three's a pattern or something like that. They were at the heart of the founders being removed. And I don't think you can remove the founders from businesses like that. But he talked about bringing in Andreessen Horowitz, and how he regretted not doing that, obviously, at Uber. It seems like he's going to be back fully in the spotlight. We see him on the TBPN show all the time now. Guys water skiing to jet skiing, to work. So
cool.
Seems to be fully back.
How do you talk about real estate experience and earning the commute? Jet ski to commute is cool. Quick hit number 2. Okay. PropMoto, your buddy Franco, argued, love this argument, love to hear your take, that the World Cup, and I'll ramble off some stats, 48 teams, 104 matches, 16 stadiums across 3 countries, 6 million fans over 39 days. You and I were blessed enough to take some customers to a couple of those games. It was incredible. Was secretly the biggest building tech pilot ever run. So what did FIFA deploy? A portfolio level command center, one intelligent command center monitoring all 16 venues with edge computing at each stadium, so local AI keeps running even if connectivity stops. Digital twins, of 16 stadiums, real-time 3D models showing crowd density, movement, congestion before it becomes a problem. We had some congestion, kind of was a problem. Pretty cool though. Private 5G at every venue, thanks to Verizon, isolated network slices for IoT, cameras, access control, guest connectivity, yada, yada, yada. Facial recognition, entry, and fan ID, biometrics, ticketless entry, which kind of was a pain in the butt, but it was cool. Cashless payments, Boston Dynamics, robot dogs patrolling the perimeters. I didn't see any of this. I saw a lot of security.
Yeah, I did not see a single robot dog.
Didn't see any robot dogs. Maybe they weren't in Boston or
We're at the wrong.
The FIFA Plus app, AR overlays of the pitch, 3D maps, arrival planning, not to mention the ball itself had its own chip in it, had to be charged and captured an insane amount of data about the actual match. What's your take on this? Are we just FIFA crazy, or is this stuff done all the time?
There's a lot of marketing fluff in here, having used the app. I think they did a solid job.
Yeah.
But I think for our audience and the people in commercial real estate, this is a good example of controlling the vertical stack, right? Where they control the programming of the box. Now it's FIFA, so they had the clout to control the box that they don't own because their programming is so powerful. And seemingly the president of FIFA is boys with the current president of the United States. But it validates the software layer from arrival to seat, if you will, which is a lot of the journey we talk to our customers about. It caters to what 60, 70, 80,000 fans need in a stadium, right? So it's very similar to, say, 10,000 people in a tower, where they are, what they need. I think the most interesting example of this is the edge compute. So I do think some of when we entered the market was early, just from when you look at the computing capabilities, or whether it's will or skill, the will to get compute on the edge to do some of the more real-time cool things that in theory you can do. I'm not totally sure how much that was actually done, other than maybe security monitoring, but I didn't see the dogs. The AI dogs would certainly be edge compute, right? So edge just means compute where it happens. So when the Tesla is computing with the cameras in the car, it's processing that in the car that's on the edge. So I think this is a bit of a blueprint for a lot of the built environment programming into the physical technology at the property, to the software layer facilitating it, and then you have centralized command. We still see so much service delivery distributed at property in the old way when you didn't have these technologies, so you get efficiencies.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. 4 more years till the next one. We'll see what kind of innovation.
Well, fascinating. They just came out with, they're trying to spin out the commercial rights of FIFA, and the Europeans seem to be just very anti-business these days. The whole UEFA.
Well, they're all on vacation. Oh, sorry, it's
They
holiday.
did an emergency meeting, and they said they won't participate in the World Cup. So that's if they spin out the commercial rights to a private equity group or whatever. So
I did see that. That was interesting. Okay, quick hit. This is gonna be super quick because we talked about this a little bit, but there's an interesting piece here worth mentioning. So we talked about BlackRock taking 80% of Meta's El Paso campus, right? We did the deep dive in El Paso. What's interesting here is the actual deal structure. Okay, so we talk about following the money. BlackRock's taking an 80% stake in Meta's $14 billion, AI data center in El Paso. Yada, yada, yada. Meta keeps just 20%. Meta contributes the land and in progress construction, $2.3 billion. BlackRock puts in almost $5 billion in cash. Meta pockets the $1 billion distribution. BlackRock also raised $12 billion in project debt to fund the build out. Meta stays on as construction manager, property manager, sole tenant when it goes live in 2028. Why is Meta doing this? Okay. Every single tech company is reporting earnings, or they have reported earnings just recently. They do it every quarter. One of the biggest items that are scrutinized is the CapEx spend. Again, we talked about that last week. Okay. So Meta's stock has dropped 10% earlier this year, a single $175 billion day wipeout earlier after it raised its CapEx forecast for AI infrastructure. What this creative deal here is, it's an off balance sheet deal. It lets Meta keep the building without spooking shareholders. It's the second deal that they've done. Blue Owl took 80% of the $27 billion Hyperion campus. To me, this is just some financial engineering to get exactly what they want to do. They're still investing in CapEx, but it keeps it off the balance sheet. Maybe this is a reason to argue why we should be reporting earnings on a 6-month basis and not quarterly. What's your take?
it could work for everybody. It all comes down to the lease construct. So without knowing the lease, hard to assess, but it could make a lot of sense for a lot of people.
Whatever. What a cop-out answer. Who cares? Quick hit number.
Talked about it, dude. We talked about it. Who cares? I'm already on to DoorDash.
Who cares? And this is kind of cool. DoorDash is an airline. Now you'll be flying DoorDash. No, I'm kidding. The important element of this is that they did just get the FAA Part 135 air carrier certification. They're not going to be, I don't think, flying people around, but they got the ability to operate drones now. We should see drone delivery service. Is this new? Is this the new experience? A new way to get food to a building or food to your house? Drones? It's actually happening.
Yeah, it's already happening down in like Louisiana and places. So it's happening.
I haven't seen it. I gotta see it to believe it.
You can get Arby's in like Alabama or one of the southern states already from
maybe that's what the internet says. I haven't seen it.
Now you're just gonna hear it and you're gonna know your food's there.
They got to be quieter. They got to figure out how to get quiet.
They got to figure that out. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Next quick hit, and then we're gonna wrap up. Okay. So I was bearish. Said I was bearish on LA, New York, Boston, but really bearish on sort of the biggest commercial real estate markets on the planet, or at least in the States. I'm still bearish, but I got this one pretty wrong here. Pretty wrong in a big way. Colliers reported 17 million of square foot net absorption in Q2 2026, the strongest quarterly performance in 7 years. pulling national vacancy to 18%. Cushman & Wakefield put 4-quarter rolling absorption to positive, almost 15 million square feet, strongest since 2020, 7th consecutive quarter of improvement. Subleases are falling, net absorption, everything's ripping right now. So I don't know, maybe I got that wrong.
Everything's ripping in the right segment of product, right? It's prime. It's a prime recovery.
Baker.
18% vacancy nationwide is still high, but the K curve is in a product and by certain regions. And when you look, you got to look at the full recovery in the leasing data, which makes it look like nothing's recovering in the CMBS data in terms of obviously delinquencies. But it's all the K curve. If we do the work to peel out some of that data, which we can with some of the CMBS, you'll see it. And it's a tale of two cities.
Yeah, tale of two asset classes, tale of two cities. Fine, whatever. Still bearish.
So you're sticking on that, huh?
Still bearish. I'm still bearish.
What do you mean by that?
The data is lagging. This is lagging data. Where's my lead data? My lead data is if people are moving out of what are some of our strongest cities, the economic policies in some of our strongest cities. I can't get behind. They're making all the wrong decisions. Those are my leading indicators. The lagging indicators will follow.
Counter argument is that there's more news about the wrong decisions than there is real policy. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'll take the steel man and say maybe the shrieking about Mamdani, who I certainly don't agree with most of his policy. It just doesn't have that much of an impact, and maybe New York's network effects that's wrong.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm bearish. Whatever. Two stories that we wanted to talk about. We're going to come back. Here's my accountability check on these two is local infrastructure. A couple of Massachusetts bridges. I want to talk about local infrastructure. We talked a little bit about eminent domain in the Cape Cod bridges and what's happening now. This is wild. And then even closer to home, our beloved Powder Point Bridge is going through a wild battle right now in some public hearings. The real stories here is just the delays, the secrecy, the sneakability, whatever it may be, and of course, who's gonna foot the bill for all these? We got to go deeper on these. One more bit of news this week. Absolute craziest. The Leopold story was crazy. This is the craziest story. This is right out of the Mafia. This is right out of The Godfather. This is absolutely fantastic. Love every second of this. A Natick couple close by to home. Okay, published the newsletter 7 years ago or so about eBay. eBay did not like what was said. So instead of angrily tweeting about them and kind of what people usually do when they're upset about that, what they did was they stalked the poor couple, this poor elderly couple. They delivered a bloody pig mask, a la Godfather putting the severed horse head. They delivered live spiders, cockroaches, fly larvae, funeral wreaths, a book on surviving the death of a spouse. They delivered, this is wild, porno mags, their dresses. eBay did this. Their home was listed on Craigslist as a nightly destination for swingers. So eBay fully stalked them. In August 15th, 2019, the eBay team, these are senior folks at eBay, right? They traveled to Boston. They tried to attach a GPS tracker to the poor guy's car around Natick. They ended up reporting it to local police, and the scheme ended up collapsing. 7 former eBay employees all pled guilty. One of them was the security chief.
Oh my God.
57 months. The settlement, $55.7 million total, was announced earlier this week. Absolutely bananas story.
Oh.
So I didn't know eBay was that gangster, but they are. Or they were.
God. Oh, these poor people. And you said they're older?
Yeah, but dude, they just
Old would be terrible to do to anybody, regardless of age.
Hold on.
Holy
fat bag of cash. About $50 million in cash. Fat bag.
Yeah. I like now that they're vindicated, good, but my God. And what an interesting sub story that we'll need to track on this is Ryan Cohen, who had founded Chewy in the pet space, competing against Amazon, did an excellent job. IPO, sold the company.
He's
and then
that, right?
Yeah, even after he sold it, Chewy, he probably sold too early because it continued to just crush. He did, I don't know if I'd describe it as a hostile takeover, but he got invited onto the board of GameStop, took over the company, and he's been pursuing a hostile takeover of eBay. I don't know where that stands, but my God, will this put wind in his sails? Like, these people are sending bloody pig masks and spiders, cockroaches, all this stuff to a poor couple that just loves online commerce enough to write about it. Like, they need new management. Here we go, Ryan Cohen. Here's a shot. This is, I bet you he pounces on this.
Absolutely fantastic. Not something you expect to read about these days. Maybe 20, 25 years ago, this level of crazy mafioso style, mob style, Godfather style bullying.
Dude, the name e-commerce bites for a pub is awesome too. I love that.
Love that. That's the show. That's one more bit of news for all of you.
That is some mafioso stuff. Wow. Way to go, Steiners. Love that. Love them getting in.
They're just looking to have a blog writing about online shopping. That's it. Right? Never knew.
Yeah. E-commerce bites.
Sure does. All right, what a show. Talked about the power. Talked about power companies, maybe the lack of power companies. Somebody can pull the plug. Talked about El Paso, Texas. Got us hungry for some salsa and quite a few quick hits that certainly were not quick at all. That's F36, end of July here. Dog days of summer are here. Thanks for coming out.
Great show.
See y'all.